My name is Vreth-Ka. I am a third-tier intelligence analyst for the galactic dominion of Yorra-Sett, and I have spent the last 40 cycles of my career documenting the military campaigns of inferior species. I have watched the Dolhari surrender after a single orbital strike. I have watched the Fen Collective collapse in 6 rotations because their leadership panicked when we cut their communications. I have catalogued victory after victory, written report after report, and submitted them all to my superiors with the calm confidence of someone who has never once been wrong. I was wrong once. I am writing this now not as a report, not as an analysis. I am writing this because my superiors need to understand with absolute clarity what happened in the city of Brakan-Voss on the 3rd moon of Selhari 7 and why I, Vreth-Ka, decorated analyst of the Yorra-Sett Dominion, filed a formal request to be reassigned to a desk that is located on a different planet, preferably one far away from humans, preferably one they have never heard of. Let me start from the beginning. Brakan-Voss was not a special city. It was not a city of strategic importance in the traditional sense. It sat in the middle of a dusty, low-humidity flatland on a moon that smelled, in my professional opinion, like something had died inside a furnace. The buildings were short, packed close together, made from that ugly gray stone humans seem to love for reasons I have never understood. The streets were narrow. The alleys were narrower. There was one main road running through the center of the settlement, and if you looked at it from orbit, it looked like somebody had drawn a line through a pile of gray rubble with a dull pencil. Our intelligence said Brakan-Voss held a human garrison of approximately 400 soldiers. Our intelligence also said that these soldiers were low-tier. Supplementary ground forces, the report read, non-elite, logistical support and territorial maintenance personnel. Combat capability rated at minimal threat. I wrote that assessment myself. I am going to come back to that. Commander Dolmak was in charge of the ground operation. He is a large Yorra-Sett officer broad through the shoulders, with 3 command medals pinned to his chest and the kind of deep, unhurried voice that makes junior officers feel secure. He looked at the tactical display of Brakan-Voss, looked at my assessment, looked at the size of his force, which numbered 3,000, and said the words that began the worst 2 days of my professional existence. This will be done before the next meal cycle. He said it the way you say something obvious. The way you say, water is wet, or this math is correct. He said it and then he walked away to go drink his evening broth, and I, standing there with my datapad, felt a small, quiet discomfort in my lower processing gland that I chose to ignore. I should not have ignored it. The assault on Brakan-Voss began at what humans call 4 in the morning. I know this because after everything that followed, I became very interested in understanding how humans think about time, and one of the things I learned is that 4 in the morning is a specific kind of awful for them. Their bodies are at their lowest energy, their minds are slow, their reaction times are compromised, their mood by their own description is terrible. Commander Dolmak chose this time deliberately. He chose it because we had been told that attacking a sleep-deprived, low-morale garrison at 4 in the morning would produce maximum psychological disruption. This was true. What was not accounted for was the possibility that the humans in Brakan-Voss had been awake since midnight. We learned this later. We learned it from one of the few soldiers of mine who came back from the Eastern District without needing medical attention. His name is Korvell. He is a competent field trooper, and the expression on his face when he returned to the command post was one I had never seen on a Yorra-Sett soldier before. It was the expression of someone who has personally watched the rules of the universe be rewritten in a language they do not speak. But I am getting ahead of myself. The initial push went well, embarrassingly well actually, considering what came next. 3,000 of our soldiers moved into Brakan-Voss from 3 sides. The 4th side was left open, deliberately, because our tactical doctrine says that a cornered enemy fights harder. Give them an exit, and they will prioritize escape over resistance. This is sound logic. This logic has worked on 14 different species. This logic was, in retrospect, the kind of logic that works perfectly right up until it meets a human who has decided not to use it. The first 6 blocks fell without a single engagement. Our soldiers moved through empty streets. The buildings were dark. The roads were quiet. Commander Dolmak, receiving the reports back at the command post, looked at me with an expression that said, "You see, before the meal cycle." I nodded. I felt better about my assessment. The discomfort in my processing gland quieted down. Then our eastern column hit the intersection of what the humans called Merchant Run and Lower Voss Street, and everything changed so fast that the first report I received was so short and so confused that I initially thought it was a transmission error. The report said, "Contact. multiple positions. They were already here. That is all it said. That is all it said because the soldier who sent it had immediately stopped sending reports and started doing something else entirely, which was running. Here is what we did not know about the garrison of Brakan-Voss. We did not know that among the 400 logistical support personnel was a woman named Dax Korvell, Sergeant First Class Dax Korvell, 29 years old by human reckoning, from a place called Tucson, which I am told is very hot and very dry, which perhaps explains certain things about her. She had been in the military for 11 years. She had a scar across her left forearm from a training accident involving something called a rappelling line, which I do not fully understand but which sounds painful. She had, by the time our forces entered Brakan-Voss, been awake for approximately 22 hours. She was also in a very bad mood. This is not me being sarcastic. I am being precise. Multiple accounts from her own soldiers given later described her mood in the hours before the assault as, and I am quoting directly from translated testimony, absolutely furious, like a trapped wasp, and scary calm, which is somehow worse than regular scary. She had known we were coming, not because of some brilliant intelligence breakthrough, not because of a sophisticated sensor array or a spy in our ranks. She had known because she had looked at the tactical situation, looked at the value of the moon, looked at Yorra-Sett expansion patterns over the last decade, and simply reasoned it through. She had written a report about it. She had sent the report up the chain of command. The chain of command had sent back a response that roughly translated to, "Thank you for your concern. We are aware of the situation. Please continue your logistical duties." She had then taken the response, set it aside, and spent the next 72 hours preparing the city like she was expecting a very large, very unpleasant dinner party. The eastern column walked into the intersection and discovered that the 3-story building on the corner of Merchant Run had been converted, without any of our sensors detecting it, into something that functioned essentially like a fortress. The windows had been reinforced with material stripped from cargo containers. The roof had a firing position with overlapping angles covering both street approaches. The basement had been connected to the building next door through a hole in the wall, giving the defenders 2 separate structures they could move between without ever exposing themselves to the street. Inside was a team of 8 humans. 8. Our column was 300 soldiers. The 8 humans opened fire, and within the first 40 seconds, our column stopped moving. This is the part that I find the hardest to explain to my superiors who were not there, who have only ever seen humans in the abstract, as a data point in a report. I try to describe it to them and I can see in their expressions that they think I am exaggerating. They think that 400 soldiers could not realistically have stopped 3,000. They are right that it is hard to believe. They are wrong that it did not happen. Because what the 8 humans in that corner building understood, and what our column did not, was that the intersection was only the beginning. The building on the corner was not the defense. It was the invitation. Commander Dolmak's first instinct was correct. He said over the command channel, "It is a distraction. Push through, volume of force." And this is where the sarcasm in me almost breaks, because he was correct in identifying that it was a distraction. He was correct. He was just spectacularly wrong about what it was distracting us from. The volume of force pushed through the intersection, moving around the building, taking casualties, pushing into the next block. And the next block had the rest of Dax Korvell's preparation waiting for it. She had spent 72 hours turning Brakan-Voss into a machine, not a random defense, not a series of individual strongpoints scattered across the city. A machine, a thing with interconnected parts that worked together, where pressure on one piece caused a response from another piece, where our movement was never free but was always being watched, always being guided, always being funneled somewhere Korvell wanted us to go rather than somewhere we were choosing to be. Our western column pushed 3 blocks in before they hit a barricade across the main road. The barricade was made of vehicle parts, construction material, and something that appeared to be a significant portion of a collapsed building facade. It was high, it was thick, it was blocking the road completely. Our western column began dealing with the barricade. While they were dealing with the barricade, they did not notice the building on their left, because the building on their left had no lights in it and appeared abandoned. They did not notice because their sensors showed no heat signatures coming from it, because the humans inside had figured out, through means I still find impressive in a way that makes me deeply uncomfortable, how to partially mask their thermal output by wrapping themselves in specific cargo insulation material. I learned this afterwards. I am mentioning it now because I want you, reading this report, to understand that the humans were not just fighting. They were thinking. They were thinking ahead of us, around us, in the spaces between our assumptions, in the gaps our doctrine told us did not exist. The building on the left opened up on the western column's flank. At the same time, 2 soldiers the column had passed and considered dead because they had been lying face down in an alley and not moving, stood up and began dealing with the column's rear, played dead, 2 of them. Just lying there in an alley, waiting, in the dark, while 300 Yorra-Sett soldiers walked past them close enough to step on them. I ask you, is this a sane thing to do? I ask you this genuinely. I have studied 43 species. None of them would lie face down in an alley while an army marched over them and wait. None of them would think of this. None of them would have the nerve to execute it, even if they thought of it. The 2 humans were named Wren and Colt. I know their names because they became, in the following hours, something of a recurring problem. By the time Yorra-Sett local dawn began to break, which is a dim, yellowish affair that does little to improve anyone's mood, Commander Dolmak's 3,000 soldiers had secured exactly 4 city blocks. Out of 37, he had lost approximately 200 soldiers. The humans had lost, as far as we could determine, fewer than 40. Dolmak stood at the command post, looking at the tactical display, and he said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, to me, because I was the analyst, because I was the one who had written the assessment, because I was standing closest to him, Vreth-Ka explained this. I looked at the display. I looked at the numbers. I said, Commander, I believe the garrison is better prepared than the assessment indicated. He stared at me. That, he said, is an extraordinary understatement. He was not wrong. Let me tell you about Lupe Okafor. Lupe Okafor was 24 years old. She was, officially, a supply technician. Her job before our arrival had involved tracking inventory logs and making sure the garrison's spare parts were properly catalogued. She had a very organized storage facility, everything labeled, everything in its place. She was, by all accounts, exceptionally good at her job. What she was also, which was not in any of our intelligence reports, was the person Dax Korvell trusted to handle the explosives. Now I want to be very clear about something. When I say explosives, I do not mean the kind of large, dramatic, fiery explosives that appear in tactical assessments. I mean the kind of small, specifically placed, thoughtfully considered explosives that are designed not to destroy things, but to control when and how things fall. Small charges, positioned over 2 days of work, in buildings, under roads, in the support structures of certain walls and certain overpasses and certain narrow alleys that our soldiers would, if moving according to standard Yorra-Sett tactical doctrine, inevitably use as movement corridors. Okafor had mapped every single one of them in a notebook, a physical notebook, paper, ink, because, and this is a direct quote from her, translated from her after the whole event was finally mercifully over, if the power goes out, the notebook still works. She had a point. When our northern column, which had been doing better than the eastern or western columns because the northern approach was wider and allowed better formation integrity, moved into the market district, they moved through an alley that Okafor had spent 4 hours working on. The alley did not explode dramatically. It did not become a wall of fire. What happened was considerably worse, in a certain sense, because what happened was that the building on the left side of the alley dropped. Not in a massive cinematic collapse. It dropped in a precise, controlled way that brought the front face of the structure down across the alley at a 45-degree angle at the exact moment our column was at maximum density in that corridor. The column stopped. It stopped because it physically could not move forward, and the collapse had also blocked the route back, and it was in a kill zone that had been prepared with careful attention to angles. I am told the engagement lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Afterward, Commander Dolmak received a message. It came through on an open frequency. It was in accented Yorra-Sett, which was startling because we had not known any of the humans in the garrison spoke our language. The message said, "You are at 40% of your original force. You have taken less than 15% of the city. Your exit routes are still open. I would like you to think about those 2 facts together." Dolmak looked at the transmission source. He looked at me. He said, "Who is that?" I checked. I cross-referenced. I found her name in the garrison records, in the supplementary personnel files, in the non-combat section, in a category labeled Logistics and Support. "Commander," I said, "I believe that is Sergeant First Class Dax Korvell. She is in the Logistics section." "Yes, sir. She speaks Yorra-Sett." "Apparently, sir." Dolmak was quiet for a moment, then he said, very carefully, "Vreth-Ka, what else does your assessment say about her specifically?" I looked at my datapad. In the file for Brakan-Voss garrison, Dax Korvell had been listed under the heading of support personnel. The only note about her, the only individual note in the entire 400-person garrison file, was a single line from a previous inspection report. The line said, "Demonstrates above-average organizational initiative." I read this to Dolmak. He closed his eyes. I do not blame him. The sun climbed to its midpoint, which on Selhari 7 produces a flat, harsh light that drains color from everything and makes the gray stone of Brakan-Voss look even more gray. Our soldiers had consolidated in the blocks we controlled. We had stopped pushing forward because pushing forward was costing us in ways that our training had not prepared us to absorb. I want to talk for a moment about what it feels like, from inside the command post, to watch an army that is trained to advance be unable to advance, because it is not simply frustrating, it is specifically, particularly demoralizing in a way that frustration does not quite capture. Our soldiers are trained to expect resistance, they are trained to push through it, they are trained to absorb losses and continue, but they are not trained for resistance that seems to have no shape, resistance that does not meet them in one place and fight them in one place, resistance that is everywhere and nowhere and always comes from the direction they are not currently watching. One of my field commanders, a solid officer named Ulnath who has been doing this for 20 years, sent me a message at midday. It read, "We cannot identify the front. The enemy is in front of us and behind us and beside us and sometimes above us. My soldiers do not know which way to face. Please advise." I did not have advice. I sent him a message that said I was working on it. I was not working on it. I was reading the garrison file again, trying to find something, anything, that I should have seen before and did not see. Some flag, some indicator, some piece of information that would explain how 400 logistical support personnel had turned 37 city blocks into this. I found one thing I had initially dismissed as irrelevant. In Dax Korvell's personal record, under prior assignment history, there was a note that she had spent 14 months attached to a specialist training program in urban defense theory. The note was brief. It said the program had been completed. It said her performance had been rated as distinguished. It said the program had been run by a retired officer named Bryce Terran, who had apparently made a name for himself in something called contested zone attrition doctrine. I looked up Bryce Terran. I looked up contested zone attrition doctrine. I sat for a moment with what I found. Then I went to Dolmak, and I said, "Commander, we need to talk about what they are doing to us." He looked at me. "They are not trying to hold us off," I said. "They are not trying to win. They are not trying to protect the city. They are trying to make us pay. Every block we take, every room we clear, every alley we move through, they are making us pay a price that is disproportionate to what we are gaining. They know they cannot defeat us. They do not have to. They only have to make the cost of this city high enough that taking it becomes worse than not taking it." Dolmak was quiet. "And," I continued, "because I had started, and I might as well finish, if they do that long enough, if they make the price high enough, then either we leave or we call for reinforcements, and either way they have succeeded." "We have nearly 3 times their number," Dolmak said. "We had nearly 8 times their number this morning," I said. "The ratio is changing faster than it should." He knew this. He knew this because he had been looking at the same numbers I had, but there is something different about hearing a thing said out loud in a quiet room in plain words, and I watched his expression shift slightly, the way water shifts when something heavy is dropped into it. "Where is she now?" he asked. "We do not know," I said. "We have no idea where the garrison commander is." "She is not the garrison commander. Technically, officially she is in charge of inventory management." Dolmak gave me a look that I will not describe in this report, because it was not professional. "We have no idea where Sergeant First Class Dax Korvell, who is apparently in charge of everything that matters, currently is," he said. "Correct," I said. "No idea." Ron Sable and Colt had not stopped. After their performance in the Western District, where they had surprised the rear of our column by getting up off the ground after playing dead, they had disappeared into the city. They had surfaced twice more. Each time the report was the same. 2 humans, moving fast, hitting something specific, then gone again. They hit a supply depot we had set up in the 4th block. Not dramatically. They hit it in a way that disabled it without making enough noise to bring immediate response. Then they left. Then 40 minutes later they hit a communications relay we had established on a rooftop in the northern sector. Then they were gone again. Orvac, who had been trying to track them, sent me a message at mid-afternoon. It read, "I think there are more of them. I think they have split up. I think there are teams." I sent back, "How many teams?" He sent, "I do not know. I cannot tell." Every time I think I have found where they are, I find out they have already moved. It is like tracking water. Track them harder, I said. He sent, yes. Also, they took Sisek. I looked at this message for a moment. Sisek was a field trooper, a competent one. What do you mean they took Sisek? I sent back. I mean they took him. He is not dead. They took him. I do not know where he is. I stared at this message. Then I went back to Dolmak. Commander, I said, they are taking prisoners. He stared at me. We are the ones who have 3,000 soldiers, he said. 2,100 and approximately 40. At last count, sir. We are the ones who have the larger army. We are the ones doing the taking. Apparently there is some disagreement on that point, I said. What Korvell was doing, and we only understood this later, was building information. Sisek and 2 other soldiers who were captured in the mid-afternoon were not harmed. They were held, and they were asked questions, and the questions were specific and tactical. Where is your command post? What are your resupply lines? Where is your commander? How many soldiers do you have in each district? What is your doctrine for handling ambush from above? This was not interrogation in the way we understand it. This was reconnaissance. She was filling in the parts of the map she could not see from the ground. By late afternoon she knew exactly where Dolmak was. We did not know this yet. We found out at sunset. The sun on Selhari 7 sets quickly. It does not linger. It drops and the sky goes from that flat, harsh yellow to a deep red that looks, if I am being honest, extraordinarily dramatic and almost beautiful, which is deeply inappropriate given the circumstances I was experiencing at the time. The command post was in the basement of a warehouse in the 2nd block, north side. It was a solid building, heavy walls, single entrance at street level, secondary exit through a loading dock on the east side. We had guards at both. We had a perimeter of 12 soldiers in a ring around the building. We had sensors covering all approach angles. The attack on the command post came from below. The basement of the warehouse connected, through a wall that had looked perfectly solid to our sensors, to the drainage infrastructure that ran beneath the North Market District. 3 humans came through the drainage infrastructure. They were covered in whatever is inside drainage infrastructure, which I am sure you can imagine and which I will not describe further. They were quiet. They were extremely quiet. They moved through the gap in the wall, which was small enough that I, who am not a large being, would have had serious difficulty fitting through it. The humans went through it like it was nothing. The first I knew of any of this was when my datapad clattered out of my hands because the table I was standing at suddenly jumped, because something had blown the door off the server rack in the corner, and then there were 3 humans in the basement, and all of the guards who were supposed to be inside were outside because the sound of something happening in the perimeter had pulled them up the stairs 30 seconds ago, which I now understood was not an accident. 3 humans, covered in drainage runoff, standing in the command post. One of them was Wren Sable. I recognized the name later from the reports. She was tall with her hair pulled back, and she was breathing hard from the crawl through the drainage line, and she had the kind of expression that people have when they are doing something they have planned very carefully, and it is going according to plan. The one in the middle said, in Yorra-Sett, which one is Dolmak? Dolmak, to his credit, said nothing. I, to my considerable later embarrassment, looked at Dolmak. The human in the middle followed my gaze. She looked at Dolmak. Then she looked back at me. Thank you, she said. I am not proud of this. What happened next is not what you might expect. They did not kill Dolmak. They did not take him prisoner. They did not blow up the command post. Korvell, because the one in the middle was Dax Korvell herself, dirty from the drainage line, utterly calm, stood in the command post of the army that had invaded her city, and she spoke to Dolmak for approximately 4 minutes. She told him, in our language, with the precision and clarity of someone who has rehearsed this because she expected to be here and expected to be saying this, exactly what the situation was. She told him what our casualty count was. She was almost exactly right. She told him what our supply situation was. She was more than right. She told him what our resupply timeline looked like given the conditions on the ground. She was entirely right. Then she told him what the next 12 hours would look like if he chose to continue. She did not threaten dramatically. She did not shout. She laid it out the way an engineer lays out a problem. Here are the inputs. Here are the processes. Here is the output. Here is what happens to your army if you keep going. Not because her people will win in a grand battle, because the math stops working in your favor and does not start working again. Then she said, or you take your people, and you use that exit route we left open, and you leave, and we don't follow you, because I have 400 people, and I am not starting a pursuit operation across open ground with 400 people." Dolmak looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at me. I had nothing useful to offer. I was still processing the fact that the command post had been entered through the drainage system. I was processing the fact that this woman was standing in front of me in person, covered in filth, speaking my language, and I could see in her eyes that she was genuinely, physically exhausted, that she had not slept in what must have been 30 hours by this point, and that it did not appear to matter even slightly. She was still thinking faster than we were. Dolmak said, "What happens if I say no?" Korvell said, "You lose the rest of your army, and I get the same result anyway. But I lose more people doing it, which I would prefer not to do, so I am asking you first." Dolmak said, "You came here yourself. You came personally. Why?" She looked at him. Just for a second, something in her expression shifted. Not to softness, just to something more direct. She said, "Because this is my city, and I wanted to look the person in the eye who decided to take it." There was quiet in the basement. The sounds of a city at war drifted down through the walls and the floor. Gunfire somewhere in the eastern district. A distant boom, Okafor's work. Probably. The wind outside moving through a city that smelled like dust and old stone and something burned. Dolmak said, "Give me until first light to organize the withdrawal." Korvell said, "You have until first light. If anything moves against us before first light, the deal is off." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Okay," he said. She nodded. She turned to go. Then she stopped. She looked back at me. "The next time you write an assessment about a garrison," she said, "read the personnel files more carefully." Then she went back through the hole in the wall. The three of them disappeared into the drainage system, and they were gone, and the guards came back down the stairs, and nobody said anything for quite a long time. I sat down on a crate in the corner of the command post. I looked at the wall where the hole was. I thought about 43 species. I thought about 14 campaigns. I thought about every assessment I had ever written, every piece of intelligence I had ever processed, every conclusion I had ever drawn. I thought about the word minimal, and how I had typed it into a report about a garrison on a moon I had never visited, about people I had never looked at carefully, about a sergeant I had not considered worth a full paragraph. I thought about demonstrates above-average organizational initiative. I thought about what I had thought that sentence meant when I read it. I thought about what it actually meant. Outside, the sky over Brakan-Voss had gone dark, and the stars of Selhari 7 had come out, and somewhere in those 37 city blocks, Dax Korvell and what was left of 400 logistical support personnel were counting their dead, checking their supplies, and waiting for first light to see if we were going to keep our word. I picked up my datapad. I began writing the first draft of the report you are now reading. I wrote the first line. The assessment of Brakan-Voss garrison was incorrect in ways that are directly my responsibility. And then I stopped. And I thought for a moment that somewhere in the dark and the dust of that gray city, a 29-year-old woman from a hot and dry place called Tucson was probably finally, for the first time in 30-plus hours, sitting down. She had earned it. I say this as someone who officially and professionally was on the other side of this situation. She had absolutely, completely earned it. Dolmak told me to get some rest before the withdrawal. I did not sleep. I want to tell you something about the Yorra-Sett withdrawal doctrine, because it is relevant to what happened next, and because understanding it will help you understand exactly how badly the next several hours went for us. Withdrawal doctrine in the Yorra-Sett military is not called withdrawal, it is called tactical repositioning. This is not a semantic difference, it is a philosophical one. The word withdrawal implies retreat, and retreat implies defeat, and the Yorra-Sett military's official position is that it does not retreat and it does not experience defeat. It experiences tactical repositioning, which is a dignified, ordered, deliberate process that occurs under controlled conditions and reflects strategic recalibration rather than enemy pressure. This is all very well and good on paper. On paper, tactical repositioning requires a minimum of 6 hours of planning, a designated rear security element, established communication between all moving units, confirmed resupply points along the repositioning corridor, and a written order signed by the commanding officer. We had until first light. First light on Selhari 7, I should mention, comes approximately 4 hours after full dark. Commander Dolmak looked at the timeline, looked at the doctrine, looked at the state of his remaining force, looked at the hole in the wall where Dax Korvell had entered and exited the command post like we were not even here, and made a decision that I believe was the correct one, even though it went against everything in our training manuals. He said, "We move at first light. All units, leave the heavy equipment. His second officer, a rigid, thin-faced commander named Torek, said, "Sir, doctrine requires—" Dolmak said, "I know what doctrine requires, Torek." Torek said, "The heavy equipment represents significant resource investment. Protocol dictates." Dolmak said, "Torek, there is a woman somewhere in this city who walked into my command post through the sewer system, told me exactly how many soldiers I have left, and gave me a timeline of how my army will be destroyed if we continue. I am going to leave the heavy equipment." Torek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Understood, sir." The 4 hours between that decision and first light were, in my professional career of 40 cycles, the longest 4 hours I have experienced. Not because anything dramatic happened. Nothing dramatic happened. That was almost the problem. The city around us was quiet, not the natural quiet of a city at rest, but the specific charged quiet of a city that is watching you, the kind of quiet that has ears. I stood near the entrance of the command post, and I listened to Brakan-Voss not making any noise, and I thought about the fact that 400 people were out there in the dark, knowing we were there, watching us, and I had absolutely no idea where any of them were. This is a strange thing to experience. It is stranger than being under fire, in some ways, because when you are under fire you understand the geometry. You know where the threat is. You can process it and respond to it. Silence with a person like Korvell behind it is something different. It is the silence of someone who has already thought about what you are going to do next, and has already decided what to do about it, and is simply waiting. I did not enjoy those 4 hours. Neither did my soldiers, who sat in their positions with the kind of alert, wide-eyed stillness of beings who have spent a full day being surprised repeatedly and have now reached the stage where they are suspicious of everything, including the dark, including the wind, including the shadows at the edges of their light sources. I walked the perimeter twice during those 4 hours, and I had 3 separate soldiers react to me approaching as if I were an ambush, which I found simultaneously understandable and concerning. We had done this to ourselves, not by being cowardly, not by being incompetent, by walking into a city and assuming that the people inside it were the variables on our terms rather than the terms being entirely theirs. Korvell found me near the eastern edge of our perimeter, around the middle of the dark hours. He appeared out of a doorway without warning, which caused me to experience a brief, undignified moment, and then he fell into step beside me and said, "They are still there." "I know they are still there," I said. "I mean right there," he said. "Close. They are close. I cannot see them, but I can feel it, the way you can feel something in the room even when you cannot see it." I looked at the dark street beyond our perimeter lights. "Korvell gave her word," I said. "Yes," said Porthak, "but she gave her word that they would not attack before first light. She did not say they would not watch us." He was right. "Go get some rest," I said. "I am not going to sleep," he said. "I know. Go get some rest anyway." He went. I stood at the edge of the perimeter light and looked into the dark for a while. I felt very strongly the sensation that something was looking back at me. First light came. Slow, yellow, flat. The sky went from black to gray to that particular uninspiring shade of Selhari 7 morning, and the city began to take shape out of the dark, building by building, street by street, until I could see the gray stone and the narrow roads and the wreckage of the last 20-something hours spread across the blocks we had taken and the blocks we had not. Dolmak gave the order to move at first light. Literally at first light. He was not interested in waiting for full sunrise. He was not interested in waiting for the tactical situation to clarify. He had made a deal, and he was going to execute it while the light was still gray and the city was still quiet, and the deal was still holding. Our soldiers formed up, 2,000 and something of them, moving in columns along the route we had come in, back toward the northern approach, toward the open ground beyond the city, toward the landing zones where our ships waited. And here is the thing. Here is the thing that I have tried to explain to 6 different superior officers in 6 different briefings since returning from Brakan-Voss, and which none of them have fully grasped without seeing it. The withdrawal went fine. We moved through those blocks, back through the city, and nothing happened. No engagement, no ambush, no last-minute complication. Our columns moved, our rear security held position until the main force was clear, and then they moved, and we filed out of Brakan-Voss through the northern approach and onto the flat, dusty ground beyond the city, and not a single shot was fired. And somehow, impossibly, that was the worst part, because as we moved out, I looked at the buildings on either side of the route. I looked at the windows, I looked at the doorways, and the rooftops and the alleys running off between the structures, and I caught, not everywhere, not all the time, just occasionally, just briefly glimpses of people watching us leave. A face in a window, a figure in a doorway that stepped back as my eyes found it, a shadow on a rooftop that had the shape of a person standing still. They were watching us go. They were watching us go, and they were not celebrating. They were not making noise. They were just silently watching the army that had come to take their city file out of it in the gray morning light. And there was something in that quiet watching that settled into me like a stone settles into water, all the way down to the bottom where it stays. We had brought 3,000 soldiers to Brakan-Voss. We were leaving with 2,041. Approximately 960 Yorra-Sett soldiers were not making this walk. Against 400 logistical support personnel. Against one sergeant first class from a hot city called Tucson who had attended a training program in urban defense theory and been rated distinguished. We were 2 kilometers out from the city when Dolmak stopped the column. He stopped it and he stood there looking back at Brakan-Voss for a moment. Just looking. The city sat on the flat ground behind us, gray and compact and not particularly impressive to look at, and the morning sun was starting to get some strength in it, and the dust was rising slightly in the wind off the open ground. Then he said, to no one in particular, in a voice that was not loud but that carried in the quiet, "Find out everything there is to know about contested zone attrition doctrine. Everything. Put it in a file. I want it on my desk before we reach the ships." He started walking again. Nobody said anything. I need to tell you what happened when we got back to the staging area, because it is relevant to the overall situation and also because it illuminates something about the human species that I think the Dominion has been significantly underestimating. The staging area was 14 kilometers from Brakan-Voss. There was a human observation post at the edge of it, which we had not known about because it was not in any of our intelligence on the region. 2 humans sat in this observation post. They had been there, it appeared, since before our assault began. They had watched the entire thing. They were sitting behind a low ridge in the flat ground, in a position that would have been invisible to our sensors because it was below the sensor horizon, with recording equipment and a communications array. They were not a combat unit. They were sending information somewhere. We surrounded the observation post carefully, because by this point we had learned to be careful, and we asked the 2 humans to stand down and come out, and they did. They came out without resistance, hands visible, calm. One of them was an older human, a man named Brek Solan. Salt and pepper hair, patient expression, the kind of person who seems comfortable no matter where they are, including, apparently, emerging from a hole in the ground after being surrounded by a stressed alien army. He looked at our soldiers around him with the quiet interest of a researcher examining an interesting specimen. The other was younger, 20-something, a woman named Vreth-Ka. She had a data recorder around her neck and the kind of bright-eyed alertness that suggests someone who has been running on stimulants and the sheer excitement of watching history happen. "What were you doing?" I asked them through the translator. Brek Solan said, "Watching." "Sending information to whom?" "Our people," he said. "Command, other garrisons in the region." "You were sharing tactical information about our operation." "We were sharing everything," he said, without any particular defensiveness, just facts. Troop movements, casualty assessments, tactical decisions, outcome patterns, everything we observed, so that other garrisons in the region know what to expect and how to prepare. I looked at him. "You are intelligence analysts," I said. "Of a sort," he said. "Are there other observation posts like this one?" He looked at me with an expression that was almost kind. The expression of someone who is about to tell you something you are not going to enjoy hearing and who recognizes that it is not your fault you did not already know it. "There are 15 observation posts like this one," he said, "within a 50-kilometer radius of Brakan-Voss. Every engagement your forces have conducted in this region has been observed and documented. Every tactic you have used, every response pattern, every point where your doctrine has been predictable, everything that worked against you in Brakan-Voss is already in the files of the next 7 garrisons on your likely path of advance." I looked at Vreth-Ka. She was still watching everything with those bright, alert eyes, and she had the recorder turned on, and I realized, with the specific cold feeling of understanding something too late, that this conversation was also being recorded. I looked back at Brek Solan. "You had this planned," I said. "Not just Korvell and Brakan-Voss, this entire region." "Sergeant Korvell planned Brakan-Voss," he said. "Someone else planned the region. Someone above her." "Who?" He smiled, just slightly. "Someone who read your tactical doctrine very carefully and found it very predictable. I am going to pause here and be direct with you, whoever is reading this report, about something that I think is important. I have been studying alien species for 40 cycles. I have studied their militaries, their doctrines, their psychology, their response patterns under pressure. And in 40 cycles, I have made one consistent error. Not with every species, not always, but as a pattern, as a tendency, as a bias I carried without knowing I was carrying it. The error is this. I have consistently looked at a species' technology level, their equipment quality, their formal military structures, and I have used those things to draw conclusions about their capability. And what I have consistently underestimated, what I have almost entirely failed to account for, is the question of what a species does when it has less than it needs. The Dulhari had excellent technology. When we disrupted it, they had nothing underneath. The Fen Collective had sophisticated command structures. When we cut communications, the structure collapsed. Humans have, and I am going to say this plainly, technology that is below our standard in several significant categories. Their equipment is adequate. Their formal military structures are reasonable, on paper. In a direct comparison of resources and firepower, they come up short in several columns. But underneath the technology, underneath the equipment, underneath the formal structure, there is something that I have been looking at this whole time and filing under the wrong category. There is Dax Korvell, who has no tactical advantage and no resource advantage and no numerical advantage, sitting in a gray city on a moon that smells like a furnace and turning all of those disadvantages into the exact shape she needs them to be. There is Lupe Okafor, who catalogs spare parts, spending 4 hours in a building placing charges with the precision of a surgeon with a paper notebook, because the notebook still works when the power goes out. There is Wren Sable and Colt lying face down in an alley while an army walks over them, waiting because they have decided that patience is a weapon and they are going to use it. There is Brek Solan, sitting in a hole in the ground for 2 days, watching everything, sending it all forward, so that the next garrison and the next garrison and the next garrison does not have to figure it out from scratch. This is not superior technology. This is not superior numbers. This is something that does not have a clean category in my assessment forms, and that is, I think, exactly why I keep getting it wrong. Dolmak held a command review on the ship. In transit back to the regional staging base, he invited me, which I would have considered an honor under different circumstances. He sat at the head of a table with his remaining senior officers, and he went through what had happened, piece by piece, without defensiveness and without the kind of blame shifting that I have sometimes seen in post-operation reviews. He was thorough. He was honest. He said the things that needed to be said. Then he said, "Vreth-Ka, the assessment." "Yes, sir," I said. "What do we do differently?" It was not a question. It was an assignment. I had been thinking about this since the command post basement, since the drainage hole, since Korvell had looked at me and said, "Read the personnel files more carefully." I said, "We stop assessing species by what they have. We start assessing them by what they do when they don't have it." Dolmak looked at me. "Expand on that," he said. "Every assessment I have ever written," I said, "begins with resources. Technology, equipment, numbers, supply lines. These are real factors. They matter. But they are not the determining factor with humans. With humans, the determining factor is what the individual does with what is available. Korvell did not have a superior army. She had an army of 400, and she used the city, and the ground, and the time, and the information, and the specific skills of specific people to make those 400 worth more than 3,000 in the environment she chose." I paused. "We chose the wrong environment," I said. "We chose to fight them in a city. In a city, 3,000 soldiers cannot bring their advantage to bear because the city limits how many soldiers can be effective at any point. The city narrowed us down to human scale, and at human scale, they are not outmatched." Torek, the second officer, said. "Then we avoid cities. They will put the things we need inside cities," I said. "If we want anything on any world they hold, they will make sure it is in a city. Not because they are unable to defend open ground, but because they know that is where they are most effective relative to our advantage." There was quiet around the table. "They are already doing this," I said. "The observation post Solan was running were sending tactical data to 7 other garrisons. Those garrisons know what happened at Brakan-Voss. They have had time to prepare. They are right now doing to their own cities what Korvell did to Brakan-Voss, with the specific lesson of what worked and what did not, with our doctrine already mapped, with our predictable patterns already identified and built into their preparation." More quiet. "How far ahead of us are they?" Dolmak asked. "I do not know," I said. "That is the honest answer. I do not know how far this preparation network extends. I do not know who is coordinating it above the garrison level. I do not know how many people like Korvell are in position across the region. I know that when Solan told me someone planned the regional strategy and read our doctrine very carefully, I believe him, and I have been trying to find that person in our intelligence files since we left Brakan-Voss. Have you found them? I have found a name, I said. A human officer, senior grade stationed at the regional command level. Name is Harv Delden, 53 years old. His personnel file lists him as a strategic planning officer. His previous assignments include 2 extended tours in something called asymmetric operations research. His file lists him as exceptional in every rating category. Dolmak looked at me. Is there a note in his file, he said, about organizational initiative? His file, I said, does not have a note about organizational initiative. His file has a full paragraph about it, written by 3 separate supervisors. All 3 say roughly the same thing, which is, consistently finds resources and capabilities that do not appear in the formal inventory. Tends to operate several steps ahead of the immediate tactical situation. Occasionally frustrating to work with directly because his preparations are not always visible until they are needed. Torek said, that sounds like a significant threat. Yes, I said, that is what I have been thinking about. We reached the regional staging base 2 days later. On the day we arrived, I received through channels I will not specify in a written report, a piece of intelligence that had been gathered by our sensor network in the Selhari-7 region. It was a communication intercept, human encrypted but not well enough. The message was short. It was from Brakan-Voss. It was from Dax Korvell. It was addressed to Harv Delden. It said, they left at first light. Casualty count as projected. Tactical analysis attached. 3 items of note for other garrisons. Their rear security is slower than their forward movement. Watch this gap. Their sensor coverage has a horizon blind spot below 2 meters, relevant for drainage systems and similar infrastructure. Their command posts locate to the most structurally solid buildings in a given area, reliable pattern for those who need to find them. Brakan-Voss is intact. We lost 31. I have updated the regional defense model with observations. Confirm receipt. Delden's response, also intercepted, was 4 words, confirmed. Outstanding work, Korvell. I sat with this message for a long time. She had sent it the morning we left, while we were still filing out through the northern approach, while our columns were still moving through those gray streets. She had already written the debrief, already catalogued the tactical observations, already sent the information forward, already updated the regional model. 31 dead. She had lost 31 people defending that city, and the morning after, before she had slept, she had made sure that those 31 deaths would mean something for the next garrison, and the one after that. I thought about the expression on her face in the command post, the exhaustion behind the calm, the 30-plus hours without sleep showing in the set of her jaw, and nowhere else. She had cared about those 31 people. I do not doubt that, not for a second. She had cared about them, and it had cost her something to lose them, and she had taken that cost and turned it immediately into a resource for the next fight. I do not know what to do with this. As an analyst, it does not fit cleanly into any category I have. It sits somewhere between military professionalism and something else, something more personal, and harder to quantify, and I have been trying to write an equation for it since Selhari-7, and I do not have one yet. 3 weeks after Brakan-Voss, the Dominion attempted to take the city of Fen-Marek on the second continent of Selhari-7. I was not part of that operation. I had requested reassignment and been granted a temporary administrative posting at the staging base while my formal request was processed. I was, however, given access to the after-action reports. Fen-Marek had a garrison of 600. It was a larger city than Brakan-Voss, with more complex internal geography, and our force for the assault was 4,000 soldiers, which represented lessons learned from Brakan-Voss in at least the numerical sense. The engagement lasted 7 hours. Our force took the city. We lost 1,100 soldiers doing it. The garrison of Fen-Marek lost 89. The after-action report contained a note at the end from the commanding officer of the assault. The note said, "It appears that the defending force had detailed knowledge of our tactical doctrine and had specifically structured their defense around our documented response patterns. Every movement we made was anticipated. Every counter we deployed had already been accounted for. It is the assessment of this command that the defending force had, prior to our assault, conducted significant preparation based on intelligence concerning Yorra-Sett doctrine and the specific events of the previous engagement at Brakan-Voss." I read that report and I thought of Brek Solan sitting in a hole in the ground for 2 days with a recording device and via Thorn with her bright alert eyes and her recorder turned on during my conversation with Solan and Harv Delden somewhere in this region, several steps ahead of the immediate tactical situation, his preparations not visible until they are needed. They had used Brakan-Voss as a lesson they delivered to every garrison in the region, personally curated, observations from the woman who had actually done it, updated tactical models, specific notes on our blind spots and our patterns and our tendencies. They had turned one defense into a template, and the template was getting better with every engagement, because every engagement added more data, more observations, more specific knowledge of exactly how we would respond and exactly where we would be predictable. We were training them. Every time we attacked, we were giving them information, and they were using every piece of it. I want to tell you about the last thing that happened before I left Cell Harry 7. My reassignment came through. I was being sent to an administrative research post far from the front, where I would be compiling reports rather than contributing to active operations, which was frankly exactly what I had asked for and exactly where I belonged after the performance of my assessment at Brakan-Voss. The day before my transport departed, I received a message. It came through official channels, marked as a civilian communication cleared by security screening. It was from Brakan-Voss. It had no formal header, no rank designation, just a name, Dax Korvell. The message said, Vreth-Ka, I know who you are. I had your file from your soldier Sissik, who told us quite a lot and whom we returned without harm. I read your professional history. 40 cycles of accurate intelligence work is a significant record. I want you to understand that what happened at Brakan-Voss was not a failure of intelligence gathering. It was a failure of category. You looked for what we had. You should have looked for what we would do with what we had. Those are different questions. A good analyst asks both. She paused. In the message. I know she paused because there was a gap in the recording. Then she said, I looked up Tucson after you left. I know someone on your side looked it up in your records. Yes, it is hot. Yes, it is dry. There is a reason people from hot and dry places build things that last. You learn early that nothing is going to help you except what you put together yourself. Another pause. I am not going to keep fighting your dominion if it cost me more people. I want you to know that. I am going to keep defending this city, and the next city, and the one after that, for as long as I have to, but I would rather not. So if you are ever in a position to be heard by someone who makes decisions, tell them what you actually saw, not what the doctrine says happened. What actually happened. Then she said, you are a decent analyst. Fix the category problem, and you will be a good one. The message ended. I sat in my quarters on the staging base, and I listened to the silence after the message finished. And outside the window, the sky above Selhari 7 was doing that thing it does at sunset, going red and dramatic and beautiful in a way that feels completely unreasonable given everything. And I thought about categories. I thought about the category of logistical support. I thought about the category of minimal threat. I thought about the category of demonstrates above-average organizational initiative, and what that sentence actually means when the person it describes is standing in your command post, covered in drainage runoff, telling you exactly how many soldiers you have left. I thought about what it means to look at a species and see their resources, and what you miss when you do only that. I thought about 31 people whose deaths became a lesson that saved people in Fenmarak and beyond. I thought about the math of that and how it is an ugly math that I would not want to be the one doing, but someone was doing it, and doing it clearly and carefully, and the results were not random. I thought about Harv Delden, somewhere on this moon, several steps ahead, his preparations not yet visible. I thought about what happens to the Dominions campaign in this region, when every garrison has been briefed on our doctrine, when every city has been prepared on Korvell's template, when every engagement feeds data back into a system that is specifically designed to use our predictability against us. And then I thought about what Korvell had said, that she would rather not, that she did not want to keep fighting, that there was a simpler option. I added a line to my report. The last line of this document, which I am writing now in transit to my new posting. The line says, the Brakan-Voss engagement and subsequent intelligence strongly suggest that the human defensive network in the Selhari 7 region is functional, adaptive and improving with each engagement. The network is led by individuals who have demonstrated an ability to operate significantly ahead of our doctrine's assumptions. Continued operations against human-held cities in this region will become progressively more costly, not less, as each engagement provides human analysts with additional tactical data. The Dominion has 3 options: pursue orbital solutions, which carry their own documented costs, withdraw from the region, which carries political costs, or, and I am noting this as a legitimate option for the first time in my professional career because I believe it is the correct option. Contact the regional human command and determine whether the objective that initiated this campaign can be achieved through means that do not involve sending soldiers into cities that have been prepared to destroy them. I paused over that last option for a long time before I kept it in. Then I kept it in. Her message came with an attachment, a single image file. I almost did not open it because I thought it might be a security concern, but the screening had passed it, and eventually on the transport, I opened it. It was a photograph, not tactical, not operational, a photograph of a street in Brakan-Voss, taken from what looked like the second floor of a building, looking down at a narrow road between gray stone walls. The street was in the early morning light, that same flat yellow-gray I remembered from the day of the withdrawal. There was nothing remarkable about the street, just stone and dust and the long shadows of morning. Except at the far end of the street, visible but small, two people were sitting on a step in front of a building, not in any tactical posture, just sitting. One of them was taller. One of them had something in her hand that might have been a cup. Korvell, I assumed. And someone else, just sitting in the street after everything. She had sent me a photograph of her city in the morning after. I do not know why. Maybe she wanted me to see that it was still there, that the gray buildings were still standing, that the narrow streets were still intact, that the city they had spent 72 hours fortifying and 30-something hours defending had come through it as a city and not as rubble. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I saved it to my personal files, not my professional ones. I saved it because I thought that in the years ahead, when I am writing assessments, when I am filling in the threat level category and choosing words from a standardized list, I might want to be able to look at it, to remind myself of what is on the other side of the words I choose. Two people sitting on a step, in a city that was still standing, because of what they and 31 others who did not make it to that morning had decided to do. I am Vreth-Ka. I am a third-tier intelligence analyst for the galactic dominion of Yorra-Sett. I have studied 43 species. One of them keeps making me revise my categories. I do not think I am finished revising,